Well, good evening, and let's open our Bibles to the book of Psalms, Psalm chapter 7. In Psalm chapter 7, this is our 27th week as we come into the Psalms. And I want to draw your attention to this psalm because, as we did so the last time, but I really want to come back to what it's dealing with. And your life will either be ruled by your feelings or your life will be ruled by God's precepts. I keep repeating that because life will beat you down. And your response tends to be by your feelings. And that's a natural tendency in the human being. So your life will either be ruled by your feelings or it's going to be ruled by God's precepts. And you have to understand that, because once your feelings get out of control, they control everything. And that's the problem with feelings. Feelings are real. They're very real. They're just unreliable for making good decisions. They're great for making bad decisions, okay? Because your emotions is what's driving the entire thinking process. My wife and I, we were in the airport in Johannesburg, South Africa, waiting to catch our flight to come back to the United States. And there was a lady who my wife pointed out to me, and she kept pointing. I kept saying, where? And she was all the way down at the front, and my wife kept pointing her out to me, and then I figured out what she was saying. And this lady kept insisting and speaking to, when you go to the, what's that called, the counter? The counter where the flight, where the crew is there, and they checking your tickets and so forth. And so she obviously was very distraught. She was upset. She was bothered. She was all of the words that you could think of. She was living this thing out, okay? And they kept telling her to sit down. They kept telling her to sit down, and she just kept on and kept on and kept on. And apparently she wanted a better seat, okay? And it was not going to happen. Flights from Africa, both to and from, are usually full. Years ago, they would send flights, halfway full, three-quarters full. They don't do that anymore. I don't know if you noticed that, okay? They pretty much send them full, okay? And which is why the flight patterns have changed for international flights. Nevertheless, she was really upset, and they were calling in they board people by zones, and so we got on the plane, and so she was making a fuss on the plane also, and it turns out she's behind us toward our left, okay? And she's way back, so I don't know where she was all the way in the back, but she was making a lot of clamor out there, and they finally brought her all the way behind where my wife was sitting. And she's 3 seats over behind to the left of where my wife's sitting, okay? And she was just not a happy camper. She was, very primpy. She was very Beverly Hills, and she felt that sitting there was beneath her. And she made that known. Okay? And so sometime during the night, I had gotten up and I went to the back, okay? And I was stretching, and I was standing there, and there was a gentleman who said, "You going to use the restroom?" I go, "No, I'm just stretching." And I was stretching, I was standing there, and she came back there, and she's carrying on again. She's worked herself into a lather, okay? And they kept telling her, sit down, and they finally got another flight attendant, and this is going on. This is just ridiculous, okay? And there's a lady sitting next to her, and it was one of those where in the middle is 4 seats, okay? So she has this aisle, and then there's 2 more, and so there was this young black lady who was sitting right next to her, and she seemed to be really bothered by that. And finally, another lady next to her says, "Are you okay?" She says, "Yes." I've learned to ignore people like this. She went just like that to her. The young black lady told the lady, "I've learned to ignore people like this. I'm not going to let her get to me." And she was really insolent, and the woman was, she was rude. She was just down rude, She felt that where she was nobody can meet her social status. And she may not know when I was in the back that, how dare you place me? Do you know who I am? And she went on and on and on. And so when we got off the plane, the flight attendants came, okay, and told her, "Please remain seated." okay? It says, we have called the authorities. She harassed them getting on the plane, the whole flight. So finally, they had enough, okay? And we deplaned. We got off the plane. I don't know what happened, but they made her sit. They had two flight attendants standing there right next to her. She said, no, you're going to stay right here, okay? And so I share that little story with you because your life will either be ruled by your feelings or your life is going to be ruled by God's precepts. And once your feelings get out of control, you nullify whatever else anybody else did with you or against you. That's the problem. You know, have you heard the old adage, two wrongs don't make a right? Once you err, you're the second error. You cancel out the first error. That's the problem. Now, you may not feel that's right. Right? It's like the guy who is like the police officers. You know, he sees you punching him, but he didn't see him punch you. Okay? All they can testify is what they saw. Okay? And that's literally what happens. Okay? Yesterday, I went to take my wife's car to get gas for her, right? And I went to fuel it up, and we're in the gas station. And apparently the lady, the attendant had, she had charged the wrong person the amount of money, and it was like $45 in change for the gas. And she got confused looking at the computer, and she said, "Is your bill $25.71?" And apparently the person who said, "Oh yeah, that's what it is. That's it. That's the amount." Okay, and so was happy to pay $25.71, but the bill was $45 and change. So when the guy who actually was $25.71 came up, she's going to charge him $45. He said, "Wait a minute." He goes, "I'm pump number 7. You have my card." And he says, and they went outside, looked at the car, and she blew up. She blew up. Now, by this time, there's 4 or 5 of us online, and she's cursing everybody out. Okay? And so at this point, I said, you know what? I'm done. I said, I don't have to stand here and listen to this nonsense, okay? And everybody behind me, we all walked out. We all left. Okay? Again, feelings are real. They're real. I never discount people's feelings, but they're extremely unreliable for making good decisions, but they are perfect for making bad decisions. And once you make those decisions, okay, we would love to say, "Oops, forgive me, that's not what I intended." That's not true either. In that moment, in your feelings out of control, you intend everything. You're just trying to backpedal out of it. And that's your problem. That's what we come to in Psalm chapter 7. And I want to remind us of this issue. And this is how to be delivered from evil pursuers. And I want to draw your attention to this psalm. It's 17 verses. Let's put it again back in its context and then begin to break it down. We looked at verse 1 and 2 the last time, but it's been a while, so I want to go back to it. Okay? Let's look at this. Starting in verse 1. "O Lord, my God, in you I have taken refuge. Save me from all those who pursue me and deliver me. Or he will tear my soul like a lion, dragging me away while there is none to deliver. O Lord, my God, if I have done this, if there is injustice in my hands, if I have rewarded evil to my friend, or have plundered him who without cause was my adversary, let the enemy pursue my soul and overtake it. Let him trample my life down to the ground and lay my glory in the dust." You can sense the angst. He doesn't know what to do. "Arise, O Lord, in your anger. Lift up yourself against the rage of my adversaries." Can you see how he's fluctuating? And he says, "And arouse yourself for me. You have appointed judgment. Let the assembly of the peoples encompass you, and over them return on high. The Lord judges the peoples. Vindicate me, O Lord, according to my righteousness and my integrity that is in me. Oh, let the evil of the wicked come to an end, but establish the righteous. For the righteous God tries the hearts and minds. My shield is with God, who saves the upright in heart. God is a righteous judge, and God who has indignation every day. If a man does not repent, he will sharpen his sword. He has bent his bow and made it ready. He has also prepared for himself deadly weapons. He makes his arrows fiery shafts." So he's recognizing, at any given moment, God can unleash retribution. You know, we would all love to have those moments, oops, I'm sorry. But by the time that moment comes, God can unleash his wrath against you instantly. And he would not be unjust. And you can cry, well, I didn't mean to do that. It's too late, you did it. This is scary because that's what he's talking about right here. He says, if a man does not repent, he will sharpen his sword. He has bent his bow and made it ready. Now you see these phrases. You see it a number of times throughout the psalm. God is ready at a given moment. He has also prepared for himself deadly weapons, and he makes arrows fiery shafts. Look at verse 14. But behold, he travails with wickedness, and he conceives mischief and brings forth falsehood. He has dug a pit and hollowed it out, and has fallen into the hole which he made. His mischief will return upon his own head, and his violence will descend upon his own pate. I will give thanks to the Lord according to his righteousness, and will sing. He says, and will sing praise to the name of the Lord the Most High. I can't even begin to imagine the agony of someone who has this kind. This is a prayer. You can imagine the entire realm of feelings that is being expressed here. Have you ever found yourself in that kind of situation? You even hear yourself saying, and you go, what did I just say? And this is where he finds himself. Let's look at the introduction. All of us have a measure of control over our emotions. We all do. I didn't say we have full control. I said we have a measure, okay? We have a measure of control over our emotions, okay? For some, that level is much higher than it is in others, right? Some of us have short fuses. We are very easily and quickly incited. Others have a great deal of control over our feelings. Right? It's like, I can remember my son when he would play, and he would play basketball, right? He's a big guy, right? And everybody, and he had this ability to withhold his anger, which I didn't understand. I would watch him, right? And they would pick on him, and then he would just punish them on the court. He would just punish them, okay? And he had this ability to hold a long time, okay? And then others, would just explode instantaneously, Have you ever seen Pastor Gonzalo? He's like that. He can hold it for a long time, okay? It's just, he is tolerant for a long time. But then when he explodes, watch out, okay? You see this. So some of us have short fuses. We are very easily and quickly incited. Others of us have a great deal of control over our feelings, right? Our patience is long, and it takes a great deal to push us to the point of becoming excited or distressed over a situation. Every individual, however, has a point at which his or her emotions are aroused. David had reached that point when he penned Psalm chapter 7. That's where David begins writing Psalm chapter 7. He reached that point, and he explodes in his emotions. Okay? He added the term, the shiagong. And the shiagong is to the introduction, which means it was to be sung with intense emotion. Can you imagine this psalm? This psalm was actually sung. It was sung in the synagogue. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine singing this today? You can't, can you? You can't. And yet, but if you did, everybody can relate to it. Everybody can relate to it. Now, they're not willing to admit to it, but they can definitely relate to it, okay? This psalm was not originally composed for congregational use. David sang it directly to the Lord. And yet it was sung. The history of it was. And as in Psalm chapter 5, David was being falsely accused, and the stakes were very high. Cush, the Benjamite, was seeking to tear him apart, and the way a lion ravages prey, right? Because remember, that's what he said in Psalm chapter 7, verse 2, right? He said, "Or he will tear my soul like a lion, dragging me away while there is none to deliver." That's what he's making reference to. David had reached his breaking point and cried out to the Lord to intervene on his behalf. He was now broken. He exploded. Now, Scripture does not reveal who Cush was. And I explained that the first time we started this. Okay? In fact, this is the only time he's mentioned in the Bible. The one time, the one detail provided about him is that he was a Benjamite, which identified him as a relative of Saul. That's all we know about him. And I'm not willing to speculate anything else, because that's all we know about him. That's it. Okay? Because of this, most commentators speculate that the historical setting was Saul's pursuit of young David, when some of Saul's men spied on David and reported lies about him, or the rebellion of Absalom, when some of Saul's relatives rose up against him. But nevertheless, there was always Saul people involved. Okay? Now, so let's look at that. In 1 Samuel chapter 24, verse 9 and 10, and notice that what we have done is to entitle this, okay, how to be delivered from evil pursuers. That's the point of this psalm. Okay? That's the main point of this psalm. So it could be one or the other. In 1 Samuel chapter 24, it says verse 9 and 10, David said to Saul, why do you listen to the words of men, saying, behold, David seeks to harm you? Why are you listening to those lies? Behold, this day your eyes have seen that the Lord had given you today into my hand in the cave, and some said to kill you, but my eye had pity on you. And I said, I will not stretch out my hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. Well, that didn't necessarily make Saul happy. Didn't make him happy. Even though David told him, I could have killed you, that just angered him even more. Okay? I mean, it infuriated him. Okay? Or look at 2 Samuel chapter 16, verse 5 through 8. When King David came to Bahurim, behold, there came out from there a man of the family of the house of Saul, whose name was Shimei, the son of Gera. He came out cursing continually as he came. Have you ever had somebody come at you that way? He threw stones at David, and all the servants of the King David, and all the people, and all the mighty men were at his right hand and at his left. Okay? I felt like I was in the gas station yesterday. Okay? He said, thus Shimei said when he cursed, get out, you man of bloodshed, you man of bloodshed and worthless fellow. Now that he kind of cleaned up that language, right? The Lord has returned upon you, all you bloodshed of the house of Saul, in whose place you have reigned, and the Lord have given you the kingdom into the hand of your son Absalom. And behold, you are taken in your own evil, for you are a man of bloodshed. Now, it doesn't matter if it was King Saul directly or it was his son Absalom, but he is being pursued by evil. Now, what do you do with your emotions and the reality that you're being pursued with evil? How do you begin to deal with that? Because your adrenaline is flowing, your emotions are flowing, and that's pretty much controlling everything about you. And that's what happens. We're human beings. We like to think that we're under control of everything. No, we're not. Okay? So we look at this 7-point outline that we're looking at, and we looked at the last time, take refuge in the Lord. That's what we looked at in verse 1 and 2. So we come now to point number 2, which is verses 3 to 5. Search your heart to see if you are guilty of offending others. This is extremely uncomfortable. Okay? This is one of those come to Jesus moments. Right? All right? Because here's what you have. Look at this in verses 3 to 5. Okay? You have to examine your own heart to see if you are guilty of offending others. Okay? Now, the biggest word in that entire sentence is if. Right? Now, look at this. He says in verse 3, O Lord, my God, if I have done this, if there is injustice in my hands, if I have rewarded evil to my friend, or have plundered him who without cause was my adversary, let the enemy pursue my soul and overtake it. Let him trample my life down to the ground and lay my glory into the dust. The scariest thing is that we love the word if. Right? You ever notice how people apologize to people? If I offended you. If I did this to you. If. By definition, that's not an apology. That's a self-justification. It is. And you hear people say, if I have done this to you, if I've done this to you, and they make this general statement, okay? And we're so accustomed to making statements like that because it's one of those things where I'm going to generalize, okay? Everybody does it. So we think that because everybody does it, that's normal. And it's not. It's not an apology. It's It's a justification for whatever I did. That's what it is. No, not yet. Not yet. I mean, he's a little hyped up here, okay? And he's questioning himself. He's right now, he's honestly in the place, because you have to remember it's been several weeks back when we were looking at verses 1 and 2. That really is what set this up, okay? Okay. So he's in the process. The question was, is this David's attempt to a repentance? No, not yet. No, that's not his attempt yet, because he's right now searching his heart. It's like, he's speaking out loud. Have you ever spoken out loud and then somebody hears you and they take off and they run with it? Okay? And you go, uh-oh. Okay? Yeah. Yeah. And this is what he does, right? This is what he does. And sometimes you have to talk out loud to hear yourself. You do, honestly. I would recommend that. It's like I pass by my wife's office and she's singing out loud, in her office, right? She's singing whatever she's practicing, whatever songs are there, okay? Well, I don't know if you realize this or not, but the scriptures, the Bible was meant for you to read it out loud. It was. It was meant for you to read it out loud. But, in our postmodern era, it's kind of ironic, because it was not until the 1940s that we went to silent reading. As the entire U.S. public library system really exploded on the scenes, I mean, it just exploded. Massive amounts of public libraries came into play, right? And what did they tell you when you walk into the library? Shh. Right? Everybody goes, shh. Okay? And somehow that got translated to everything else. The scriptures, the Bible was meant for you to read it out loud. It was meant for you to hear the words, and for your own ears to hear your own voice speaking it. Okay? But what's happened is, in this era that we live in today, everybody just reads it very quietly, okay? And, they get lost in the reading. Well, this is what you have here. This is exactly what you have here. David is speaking out loud the words. Now, somebody may walk by you and think, are you crazy? You talking to yourself? Yes, I'm talking to myself. That's right. It's just me and God. You're talking to who? I'm talking to God, okay? That's okay. I don't care. It's like the guy, it's like, remember years ago, my wife and I, we were watching, I forget which the name of the program, James Robertson, right? That's his name? That's his name, Robertson, right? It's not Robertson, it's Robinson. Oh, Robinson. Okay, so he, as a young man, he got so distraught he got put into a psychiatry ward. Yeah, he got locked up. He literally got locked up, and they actually had what do they call it, the white jacket on him, the straight jacket on him, and he was talking to God. He's in an insane asylum, right? So everybody thinks, well, he's crazy, right? So finally, after months and months and months of treatment, right, and nothing was working, and one day he's talking to God, and God answers him. And he says, my mind came back. He said his mind came back, and so when the attendants came in, he said, I want to see the doctor. So the doctor came in, and they asked, well, how do you know you're cured? He said, God told me. That's probably not the place to say something like that, right? But he said that, okay? And he testifies this. Later on, the medical staff at wherever this place was, actually testified that he actually said that. And they gave him all these tests, and they said, his mind is back, but we don't understand it. But they couldn't get past the fact that he's in an insane asylum in a straitjacket. He said, how do you know? He said, God told me. I talk to him all the time, okay? And they just thought that he was kooky, he was crazy, right? But you see, but the truth is that Scripture is designed for you to read it out loud. It is. And a lot of people, they read out loud. They may not speak it loud, but they speak it loud enough so they can hear themselves. Okay? That really is how it was meant to be read. But, today that's not considered to be sophisticated. Okay? So this is what he's saying. Now look at this. Here's the most valuable lesson in this psalm. This is key. This is very key. David sincerely invited the Lord to search him through and through to see if he had done anything to provoke his enemy. That's absolutely scary. God, what did I do to have caused this? No, most of us, look what he did. Look what she did. And we never focus on, did I possibly have a part in this? Yesterday, Pastor Phil and I were at a meeting. And we were at a meeting with another pastor, and we were listening. And it was pretty evident. We didn't even have to say anything to each other. It was pretty evident that this pastor had caused this situation. But he kept focusing on what this other person was doing, okay? But it was pretty obvious that he had caused this situation to take place. Now, true, it wasn't direct, but he did a lot of indirect things that allowed him to come to this point. And then the thing just exploded. And for I don't know how long Pastor Phil and I were there yesterday afternoon as we listened to this. Okay? And this is a classic example of this. Where David is asking this question, right? Look what he says in verse 3. Oh, Lord, my God, if I have done this, if there's injustice in my hands. He's asking the question. He says, if I have rewarded evil to my friend or have plundered him in who without cause was my adversary. Look at verse 5. Let the enemy pursue my soul and overtake it. Let him trample my life down to the ground and lay my glory to the dust. How many of us are willing to say something like that? Lord, if my ministry comes to an end right now, I accept it. How many of us are willing to come to that kind of a point? David literally puts himself upon the altar of sacrifice. Lord, if I'm wrong, then I'm wrong. Then go ahead, destroy me. Okay? And what we heard in this meeting yesterday was a lot of feelings. And they were real. They were real. Huh? I just kept trying to bring it back to, but look at what you did. So, here we go. Before he dares to ask the Lord to execute justice against Cush, because that's really what we want to do, right? Kill my enemy, right? David needed to establish that he was not guilty of any injustice toward him. I think that really is the most crucial part of it. Because if there is, then your request becomes unjust. Remember what I said, two wrongs don't make a right? Your error cancels out the first one, not because the first one is more holy, more righteous than yours, or it didn't happen. No, because in the book of James, or the book of Phil, right? The book of Philip James, is one of those. Is that book that just slaps you? It just every time you turn around, it's just slapping you, slapping you, slapping you, slapping you. Because the Apostle James writes the book of James, and he's very direct. It's really difficult to misunderstand James. You have to be outright lying and denying what James says. You have to just deny James even said anything, okay? And James says, to whom to know to do right, right? And does not what? It is what? It is sin unto him, right? That's what it says, right? Very clearly. Now, you cannot misunderstand that. And yet people do, emotionally. I didn't say intellectually, I said emotionally. And that's a natural tendency. And here's what we have. So he's daring to ask God, you know what? It's like, show me what I've done wrong. Okay? And David needed to establish that he was not guilty of any injustice toward him. That's the reason why he's not asking for forgiveness yet. He has to get that clear. Okay? He humbly acknowledged the possibility that he was in the wrong and that he caused Cush to do wrong. You know, it's like the little boy who he takes the little pebble, right? And he's got it in his pocket, right? And he throws it and then puts his hand back in the pocket. You know, it's you have to understand that he had to acknowledge the possibility that he provoked somebody else. Okay. You see this happen all the time. You just see it all the time. A look at somebody with disdain, and all of a sudden you got a war going on, okay? But the other person looks innocent. Okay? So I want you to understand that. David's statements in these verses are like a protest of his innocence. For he knew that he stood guiltless before his enemy and before God. The oath he swore is extreme and reflects his inflamed emotions at the situation. Look at this. Look at what he says in verse 5. Psalm chapter 7, verse 5. Let the enemy pursue my soul and overtake it. Let him trample my life down to the ground and lay my glory in the dust. How many of us are willing to make a statement like that? Do you understand? Let me tell you something. I can tell you I can't make that statement, okay? You remember the Apostle Paul? Remember the book of Romans? And Paul said, God, if it be, take my life and send me to the gates of Hades to save my people. I want you to understand something. Send me to hell and save them. That was the Apostle Paul's prayer. Now, let me ask you something. Was Paul guiltless? No, but he was forgiven. Right? He was forgiven. He was forgiven. And he was righteous in the eyes of God, just like David was righteous in the eyes. Even though David committed all kinds of sins, because God declared him to be so. Right? The same way he declared the Virgin Mary, right, to be righteous. Right? If he can declare, and people go, well, how can you just do that? Well, God created everything with the word, with the spoken word. From nothing, everything. Okay? And here you have this. And David makes this kind of a statement. I have to pause and go, am I capable of making a statement like that? Nevertheless, he opened himself completely to the Lord for an examination of his ways. When was the last time you've done that? When's the last time you said, God, examine me. Talk to me. Reveal it to me. Make it very clear to me everything I have done wrong in every conceivable aspect of my life. Because that's what David was doing. He invited the one whose eyes see all, outward words and actions as well as inner thoughts and motives, to search him thoroughly. I mean, that you are literally, spiritually, completely naked before him. There is nothing you and I can hide. And he sets a pattern before he can deal with being pursued by evil. He has to first clarify what his relationship is to God. So look at this with me. A, the areas of possible sin. Go back to verse 3 and 4, Psalm chapter 7. O Lord my God, if I have done this, if there is injustice in my hands, if I have rewarded evil to my friend or have plundered him, who without cause was my adversary. So he's looking at the areas of possible sin. David named two specific accusations the Benjamite was making against him, or they may be serious hypothetical sins that David is saying he did not commit. Nevertheless, what he's doing, he's asking God, examine him. Let me ask you, do you remember every sin you've ever committed? I can't remember that. You know, it's not just in deed, right, in your actions, but how about your thoughts? You know, I find myself constantly saying, whoa, Lord, forgive me for that. In a short burst of anger, you wish the worst on somebody, right? And it's like I got to stop myself So I got to talk to me, right? Could we pass that kind of an examination? Do you understand what I'm saying? This is the reason why the Psalms, we read it too fast. Slow down and look at what he's actually saying. So there's two areas. First, he's creating or provoking a conflict for no reason with someone who was at peace with him. That's a possibility. David called upon God to determine if he was guilty of picking a fight, stirring up unnecessary trouble with Cush, or more likely with Saul, Cush's relative king. Was he provoking this? You know, sometimes we provoke an issue and don't even realize we've done so. You ever said something to somebody else and then that somebody else took it to somebody else? Far be it that has ever happened in our lives. The problem is that they took it and then they gave their version of it. Okay? Second, is not as clear. Reliable translations and good commentators differ on the meaning of the Hebrew word kalatz. It's kalatz in this verse. This word is often translated as deliver, but it is also frequently used of soldiers who were armed of war. Now, what I'm talking about? Go back to 7:4, Psalm 7:4. In Psalm 7:4 it says, if I have rewarded evil to my friend or have plundered, kalatz is the word, kalatz. Him who without cause was my adversary. That's what he's talking about. Now, this is the second possibility, right? And it's not clear. If I rewarded evil to my friend or have plundered, the word plundered there, you see, depending on what version of the Bible you have, okay? It's a variation of the word is used in plundering the enemy. Most translations in the outline of the scripture interpret it as plundering or robbing. Let me give you an example of that. In Judges chapter 14, verse 19, here's the way they uses the word, okay? It's not, you don't see it readily at first, but if you look at the Hebrew text, you see it. Look at it. In Judges chapter 14, verse 19, then the Spirit of the Lord came upon him mightily, and he went down to Ashkelon and killed 30 men and took their spoil. You see that phrase, took their spoil? He plundered, he delivered it from them. You know, a lot of times, you know, in the modern English, when we say deliver, I'm going to deliver something to you, right? In other words, I'm giving you something. Well, in the old English, okay, deliver didn't mean give it to you. It means take it. You're being set free from it. It's being taken from you. And so a lot of times, you see, we read words in the modern English and we misunderstand what is being said. So, or the word plunder. Now, I think we would understand it better if we use the word plunder. Right? Look what he says. He says, then the Spirit of the Lord came upon him mightily, and he went down to Ashkelon and killed 30 men and took their spoil and gave the changes of clothes to all those who told the riddle, and his anger burned, and he went up to his father's house. Okay? He took it. Well, look at 2 Samuel chapter 2, verse 21. In 2 Samuel chapter 2:21, he says this, so Abner said to him, turn to your right or to your left and take hold of the one young man from yourself and take for yourself his spoil. We understand it better. Well, that's the same idea that's in Psalm 7:4. He says, if I have rewarded evil to my friend or have plundered him who without cause was my adversary. Now, in the King James Version of the Bible, however, translates it as deliver and understands it as a reference to David's refusal to take advantage of opportunities to slay Saul when Saul was pursuing him without just cause. So it gets a little more convoluted in the King James Version because you really don't understand that that's what it's actually saying. We see that in 1 Samuel chapter 24. We see it in 1 Samuel chapter 26. If this is the accurate meaning, it is valuable evidence for establishing the historical setting of this psalm. Look at this. Let's go to 1 Samuel chapter 24. You go, well, why are we going to take the time to read that? Because this is the psalm that we don't get a clear indication what is the historical setting for it. Do you realize that all the psalms have a clear historical setting? If you go through the psalm slowly and you cross-reference it with the Old Testament, you see where the psalm is explained. Okay, everywhere else in the Old Testament. The mistake is that we take the psalm as a separate hymn book only. But the Psalms, you know what the Psalms is? It's the theological richness. We see that the Psalms, okay, it emerges out of a profound knowledge of God rooted in a relationship with his people. And you can see that's very clearly here if you take the time to look at what is this referencing to. Look, go to 1 Samuel chapter 24. Look at this in verse 1 through 11. Now when Saul returned from pursuing the Philistines, he was told, saying, behold, David is in the wilderness of En-Gedi. Then Saul took 3,000 chosen men from all Israel and went to seek David and his men in the front of the rocks of the wild goats. He came to the sheepfolds on the way, and there was a cave, and Saul went in to relieve himself. Now David and his men were sitting in the inner recesses of the cave. That's pretty embarrassing. This was a Kodak moment. You know, it's like when I remember years and years ago, I remember this. President Johnson, remember Lyndon Johnson? You know, he had a habit, I'll never understand it, but Lyndon Johnson had a habit of relieving himself with the door open, his security staff standing in front of the door, and him having a staff meeting when he's relieving himself, and there was always a reporter taking a picture. And so there are numerous pictures of him sitting on the commode. I don't understand that. I don't pretend to explain that, okay? But Johnson had a habit of doing that. Well, here we have Saul goes to relieve himself, and there's the guys watching him. They're watching him, okay? Good thing they didn't have cell phones those days, right? Here was a Kodak moment, right? Look at verse 4. The men of David said to him, behold, hey, this is the day which the Lord has said to you. Behold, I am about to give your enemy into your hand, and you shall do to him as it seems good to you. Then David arose and cut off the edge of Saul's robe secret. He had no clue. He's relieving himself, had no clue David is behind him. Had no idea. It came about afterward in verse 5 that David's conscience bothered him. It should have bothered him, right? It's like, why are we doing it? What are we doing here, man? I mean, even my worst enemy, we shouldn't be watching this, okay? It came about afterward that David's conscience bothered him because he had cut off the edge of Saul's robe. In verse 6, so he said to his men, far be it from me because of the Lord that I should do this thing to my Lord and the Lord's anointed, to stretch out my hand against him, since he is the Lord's anointed. David persuaded his men with these words and did not allow them to rise up against Saul, and Saul arose and left the cave and went on his way. Right? So Saul leaves them a present, right? And they're standing there, right? You guys have no, I enjoy reading the Word of God. Now afterward, David arose and went out of the cave and called after Saul, saying, hey, buddy, hey, listen to me. The Lord, my Lord, he says, my Lord the king. And when Saul looked behind him, David bowed with his face to the ground and prostrated himself. Now, that must have been a shocker. You mean you were in there all this time? And David said to Saul, why do you listen to the words of men saying, behold, David seeks to harm you? Behold, this day your eyes have seen that the Lord had given you today into my hand in the cave, and some said to kill you, but my eye had pity on you. And I said, I will not stretch out my hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. Now, my father, see, I indeed see the edge of your robe in my hand. Well, that just infuriated him even more. For in that I cut off the edge of your robe, and I did not kill you. Know and perceive that there is no evil rebellion in my hands, and I have not sinned against you, though you are lying in wait for my life to take it. I mean, the guy's trying to kill you. At some point in time, David gets a control of his emotions. Here's a perfect opportunity. Nobody would know. Right? 1 Samuel chapter 26. In 1 Samuel chapter 26, look at this, verses 6 through 12. Then David said to Ahimelech the Hittite and to Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, saying, who will go down with me to Saul in the camp? And Abishai said, I will go down with you. So David and Abishai came to the people by night, and behold, Saul lay sleeping inside the circle of the camp with his spear stuck in the ground at his head, and Abner and his people were lying around him. Then Abishai said to David, today, Hey, buddy, look at this. God has delivered your enemy into your hand. Now, therefore, please let me strike him with the spear to the ground with one stroke, and I will not strike him the second time. I guarantee you, one blow, he's gone. But David said to Abishai, do not destroy him, for who can stretch out his hand against the Lord's anointed and be without guilt? See, we go back to that issue of two wrongs don't make a right. He knew he could not touch God's, right? David also said to him, as the Lord lives, surely the Lord will strike him, or his day will come that he dies, or he will go down into battle and perish. And the Lord forbid that I should stretch out my hand against the Lord's anointed, but now please take the spear that is at his head and the jug of the water, and let us go. So he wanted Saul to know, I was here. When Saul woke up and he said his spear was gone, he wanted to know, I was here. So he says, verse 12, so David took the spear and the jug of water from beside Saul's head, and they went away, but no one saw or knew it. I mean, this is the stealth ninja thing, right? I mean, this is what Bobby does. You know, she comes in and you have no idea she came in. She does this thing. You know, Phil does this thing. You know, he's stealth. And I'm like, where'd you guys appear from? Where'd you come from? Okay, look at this. These guys came from the school of David. Look at this. So David took the spear and the jug of water beside Saul's head, and they went away, but no one saw or knew it, nor did any awake, for they were all asleep, because a sound sleep from the Lord had fallen on them. God made sure they stayed asleep. Now, here's the key. Let's look at the second possibility. The needed attitude. To acknowledge that one deserves to be punished for sin by offending others. How many of us are willing to acknowledge, you know what, God? I deserve that. Look at Psalm chapter 7, verse 5. Let's go back again and look at it. Let the enemy pursue my soul and overtake it. Let him trample my life down to the ground and lay my glory in the dust. I've not heard too many people say something like that. Nevertheless, David's unwavering confidence in his innocence is reflected in his taking a severe oath. This is the reason why I said your life will either be ruled by your emotions or by your feelings, or your life will be ruled by God's precepts. David makes a decision that his life is going to be ruled by God's precepts. Look at this. If he was guilty of the accusations against him, he deserved punishment equal to his crimes. If the Lord examined him and found him at fault, he was willing to accept an appropriate sentence for his offense. He invited God to lay upon him the same justice he was seeking against Cush. What did he want for Cush? Destroy him. Are you willing to receive the same punishment? Is it not true that when we're the ones who are accused, are we not seeking the mercy of God? But when you're accusing somebody else, you're seeking the judgment of God, right? Isn't that right? Isn't that right? Isn't that the natural human tendency? Isn't that true? You know, we heard that in that meeting yesterday. That's it. That brother, he's done here, right? He's done. There's nothing else that can be done. And at that point, I just was quiet. I could not go any further at that moment because I understood that the emotions was real. Okay. And we saw that get played out. But it's real. I'm just grateful that God is gracious to all of us. I mean, I'm just grateful that he's gracious to all of us. You know, we cry out, where's justice? You never want justice. You and I never, you see all these protest signs on the TV, justice and justice and justice. You never want justice. You want mercy, mercy, mercy. Look at this. If David had unjustly provoked Saul or was guilty of rebelling against Saul or had ambitiously seized Saul's throne, then he deserved a death sentence. His unjust actions had cost King Saul his throne and his life. David's language is graphically intense and emotionally charged. He cursed himself to a violent, humiliating death, to be trampled into the dirt in the utter disgrace. How many people you know cursed themselves? God, destroy me. Go ahead. Do whatever you have to do. How many of us are willing to make those kinds of statements? And that's what David is doing. And we're at the beginning of the psalm. Look at this. Now we go back. Remember I said to you about those if. Here's the thought. David's ifs are not the ifs of insincere, half-hearted apologies. I'm going to go back to that. If, you know what, if I've offended you, if I have done this to you, please accept my apologies. That's not an apology. It's a real subtle way of self-justification is what it is. Go back to Psalm 7, chapter 7, verse 3 and 4. O Lord, my God, if I have done this, if there is injustice in my hands, if I have rewarded evil to my friend, or have plundered him who without cause was my adversary. He's asking God, I may have. And I don't remember or I don't know how I did it. But he's not saying that he didn't do it. He's asking him, reveal it to me. Look, many people offer hypocritical apologies composed of an if statement. If I have offended you, if I did what you say, if I wronged you in any way, then I am sorry. But if I haven't done that, I'm not sorry. Right? Isn't that the logic? Isn't that right? Think about that. Such apologies are usually not genuine, and they do little to restore relationships because the person is stuck on if. You know, the person is looking at you going, what do you mean, if? You can't see my face. You can't see this, that I'm mad for what you've done. I mean, now you're adding insult to injury. And it usually ends even worse than what it was, right? And that's what's happening. And look at this. Sincere. Such apologies are usually not genuine, and they do very little to restore relationship. Sincere, effective apologies own up to the wrong done and repent of it. That goes back to the question earlier that kid asked, you know, was he at this point trying to apologize? No, not yet. He's still trying to ascertain what I did wrong. Okay? And if I have, Lord, then I'm open for your punishment. Hey, let me tell you, this thing, you know, we were in that meeting yesterday, Pastor Phil and I sat and I made this statement. I said, look, the ministry is not for cowards. And I made that statement. But let me tell you something. Being a Christian is not for cowards either. Because we have to talk to God. We have to talk to God. You know, none of us are perfect, and we don't pretend to be. Although he is convinced of his innocence, David is acknowledging the possibility that he is at fault. And he is accepting responsibility if, in fact, he is. Finally, toward the end of that meeting we had, the brother acknowledged, yeah, I can see what I've done. Not true? I can see what I've done. I can see how this thing unfolded. Once that happened, you know, okay, then we're done. We're done. Now you have to do what you have to do. Okay? And hopefully that's taking place, okay? Right? That's the beginning of it, right? It's not the end. It's the beginning of it. To acknowledge the possibility, I might be wrong. I might have caused this. Look, it doesn't matter. Look, let me encourage you. Your intentions is not important. You may have good intentions, but it came out bad. You have to get past your intentions because, you see, you're stuck on the intentions. That's why you say if. No, you got to get past that. It's the results. But you see, that really is common, that situation that he's describing. You know, and you have to kind of acknowledge. And a lot of times, to be honest with you, okay, we are wrong. We are wrong. But, the idea of saying I'm wrong are not easy words to pass our lips, It's not easy. No way, I can't say that, okay? And the fact that it's true, it's like look, on Sunday, we're going down the freeway, right? On Sunday, my wife, she says I drive too slow, right? And so, which is true, and I've noticed that I drive slower now. And for me, I've noticed that I don't have the reaction anymore. I don't react as fast anymore, and I see that in me. Okay, but I was convinced, and this but statement is will clarify it a bit for you. I was convinced, and I'm not justifying it. And I was convinced that the speed limit is 55. So my wife says, and everybody's going around us. They're flying around us, and I can see people blowing their horn and looking at me, and I'm just going down it. And my wife says this, she goes, honey, why are you driving so slow? I said, I'm driving the speed limit. She goes, that's not the speed limit. I go, sure it is. She goes, that's 55. And she says, where have you been? And she says, that changed years ago. I didn't know that. I had no idea that the speed limit had changed. You know how shocked I was? I'm driving, I'm going, when did the 55 change? I'm still stuck on 55, and everybody's flying around me, okay? Which is the reason why we got there so late, okay? It's like, hey, I could cause a problem. Yeah, sure. Yeah. I think that you could see from the examples here how easy it is to cause something or provoke something, whether you do it intentionally or not, okay? And all of a sudden now you got an argument going and emotions have taken control. Now, you see, that's exactly what this psalm is dealing with. We haven't even got to the essence of the psalm yet, okay? But But you understand what I'm saying? This sounds like one of those counseling sessions, This is one of those Dr. Phil sessions you're going through, okay? But it's the truth. It's the truth. And it happens so fast. You could speak to your son. You could speak to your daughter, and you make a statement. All of a sudden, they explode on you. And you're trying to figure out, what did I say? It's so easy to do that. And all of a sudden, you find yourself with emotions, and people are mad at you, and they don't talk to you for a whole week, And you got to give them the time and the distance, to calm down. But this is easy to do because we are emotional beings. And sometimes the best thing is to say, I'm sorry, Not because necessarily you may be guilty of it, okay? But you have to bring this situation to a close. Because it's just going to get, well, look at the description he gave. It escalated really fast, right? And it happens. It happens in the church. It happens among believers all the time. And all of a sudden, it happens, it happens with your closest friends. For those of you who have a lot of brothers and sisters, whew, man, life is hard, man. It's like, you got brothers and sisters going at it, and no matter what you say, they're not going to let it go. And they'll hang on to this thing for years. I come from a very large family. That stuff has lasted for 40, 50 years, man. And it's nuts. It's absolutely insanity. But you can see this happen. So that's the reason why David is dealing with this issue because he has to ask himself some honest questions. And I think sometimes we're not willing to ask ourselves the honest question. Look, one thing I may not be willing to ask you an honest question for fear of how you're going to react, okay? But clearly, I should be able to ask myself an honest question. You understand what I'm saying? God, forgive me if I did something wrong, but kill these guys. Forgiving. Yeah. Well, let me just take that one step further. No, I don't want you to back up. I want you to just take it to its natural conclusion. Where you going with this? Okay? Do you remember? I don't know. I've said this several times, but the more spiritual mature you are, the more you are mature in your spiritual walk with Christ. The more spiritual you are, the more mature you are in your walk with Christ. You know what happens? What happens is that you become more sensitive to your own sins, even the little ones, the slightest little teeny sins, they become bigger and bigger and bigger in your life, and they bother you. When we first come to the cross of Jesus Christ, we know those sins are forgiven, right? But we're still not that sensitive. And the older you become, the more mature in Christ you become, the more sensitive you become to your own sins. And you know what? You become more sensitive to the sins that are very little, very little, very little, very little, that we in the past treated as insignificant, but now all of a sudden they're not insignificant. It's like that big old mirror staring you in the face, okay? It's the neon lights, And David comes to this point in his life, okay? So when you ask, I'm trying to understand that part. That's literally what's happening with him, in that the more you walk with God, the more you walk with the Spirit of the living God, the more light comes into the deepest recesses of your being, that it shines light in the deepest corners of your spiritual life, and you begin to see those little things. It's like, you walk by somebody and you just go, You just snap your lips and you roll your eyes, and all of a sudden you realize that's huge. Because it just offended somebody else. Where in the past, you wouldn't have thought about it. Okay? You wouldn't have thought about it. Obviously, something happened in your spirit for you to stop the vehicle and talk to somebody. See, the more you walk with Christ, the more spiritual you become. Okay? You become more sensitive to the little sins, because what's happening is that the person of the Holy Spirit is growing in your life. The light is getting brighter and brighter and brighter, and you become more sensitive to those little things that I got hidden deep inside of my soul. They're starting to come out more, and they're beginning to bother you. They're beginning to bother you. Little things. It's like there's a lot of things that I used to watch on television. I don't watch anymore because it bothered me now. It's now bothering me. It's like the whole vocabulary has so radically changed that it now irritates me. Okay? And so I just, okay, let me let that go. Let me let that go. Okay? So all of us, we all grow at different, at different things in our lives. And what David is doing, David now finds himself where that little thing is bugging him, is bothering him. And that's when you begin to notice that you're becoming more mature. Okay? It's not that you're more guilty, because you can't be any more innocent than what you are. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? Okay? But you find yourself in this state, and that's where David is. Now David can say, Lord, and if that's true, then I deserve your wrath. There is, in the eyes of God, there's no difference between, how people talk about that little white lie, you know how people talk all the time, this little white lie compared to murder. Sin is sin. Sin is sin. But we are the ones who created the categories, okay? But sin is sin. It's those little things become bigger in your life, not because you're more sinful, but because you're realizing that you're walking closer and closer to the Lord. Okay? And I don't know if I answered your question or not. Although he is convinced of his innocence, David is acknowledging the possibility that he is at fault, and he's accepting responsibility if in fact he is. Every believer should possess this attitude. We should recognize the fact that we are not always in the right, and that we may unintentionally cause offense to others without realizing it. We should be willing to accept responsibility for our role in a conflict or misunderstanding, and be willing to do what is necessary to right the wrong we have committed against another person. Again, doesn't matter if I didn't intend to do it or not. In any instance of conflict with another, we should invite the Lord to search us and reveal to us any trespass that we have committed. Note how David ends this. In Psalm chapter 7, verse 5, he says, let the enemy pursue my soul and overtake it. Let him trample my life down to the ground and lay my glory in the dust. Now, that's built on verse 1, 2, 3, 4. Don't just take verse 5 out of its context. This is built on 1, 2, and 3, and 4. Okay? So it's a good place for us to pause and in reflection on these truths and examine our hearts and actions toward others. This is the reason why he says in the book of Romans in chapter 12. In Romans chapter 12, he says this in verse 16, 17, and 18. He says, be of the same mind toward one another. Do not be haughty in mind, but associate with the lowly. Do not be wise in your own estimation, right? Never pay back evil for evil to anyone. Respect what is right in the sight of all men. If possible, so far as it depends on you, be at peace with all men. Now notice what he says. So far as it depends on you, be at peace. The truth is, sometimes you can't be at peace with other people because they don't let you. They don't want to. You've done everything. You've gone to your brother, you've gone to your sister, whether it's in Christ or your family, okay? And you've tried to reconcile with them, and they still won't. You've done everything, and you know what? You're free. You've tried everything, and they just won't. Now, you may carry the burden that you feel bad that situation hasn't been fixed. Okay? But you've done everything possible. At this point, you got to let that go in God's hands. You can't carry it like if it's a 500-pound bag of, on your back, because it's going to kill you. It's going to eat you alive. So he says, if possible, so far as it depends on you, be at peace with all men. Notice he says, if possible. Now, I've looked that up in the Greek to make sure that I understood it correctly. And it literally says, okay, that there is a possibility, the haramang, it means that that there's a possibility that the other person won't. Look at Romans chapter 14, verse 19. It says, so then we pursue the things which make for peace and the building up of one another. Look at Ephesians chapter 4, verses 1, 2, and 3. He says, therefore I, the prisoner of the Lord, I implore you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling with which you have been called, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, showing tolerance for one another in love. And some people they drive you nuts, man. being diligent to preserve the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. Some people are always going to get your goat. And sometimes it's not because they do it intentionally. I want to make sure you understand that clearly. It's because sometimes your personality and that other person's is just different. It's just different. That's all it is. It's not that one is better than the other, or one is evil and one is not. No, it's just sometimes you're just so different from one another, okay, that you don't allow that to take place. But he says here, he says, be diligent to preserve the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. Look at Psalm 139, verse 23 and 24. He says, search me, O God, and know my heart. That's a scary prayer. Search me, O Lord, and know my heart. Try me. Put me to the test and know my anxious thoughts. That's even scarier. And see if there be any hurtful way in me, and lead me in the everlasting way. Whew. That's being naked before God. In Proverbs chapter 3, verse 30, he says, do not contend with a man without cause, if he has done you no harm. Let it go. Let it go. Just like when I was at that gas station. That lady was so upset and out of control. She was so angry. And I knew I had nothing to do with it. But she was exploding in anger at that moment. I said, well, if I stay here any longer, you know what's going to happen? I'm going to take the offense, okay? And now this is going to get even uglier. Mm-hmm. So he says, do not contend with a man without cause, if he has done you no harm. The person wasn't doing me any harm at that moment. But the longer you stayed in that situation, you know what's going to happen? Your emotions, your feelings, they're going to get the best of you. And now, there was a man, there was 4, 5, 6 people behind me. There was a man in front of me. And about the third or fourth guy behind me, he said to the lady, the difference is $20. He goes, I'll give you the $20. So it doesn't come out of your pocket. And she was so upset. She said, well, who the F and F you are? And at that point, we all looked at each other. Okay, you know what? Let's just back out of this store. And we left it. Because, her emotions at that moment, she was so vulgar and so vile and so angry, so emotionally, she was so oppressed in her own emotions. She couldn't even see the help in front of her. And at that point, if any of us stayed any longer, it was going to get ugly. You know what? Back out of here. And the manager came and said, hey, and we all looked at him and said, you got a crazy employee in there now. I'm out of here. And you know what? I don't need my receipt. You can keep it. I'm out of here. See, but if you stay and you get self-righteous, you can get angry and tell the person, you know what, you don't have a right to talk to me like that. I'm the customer. I'm this, I'm that. Well, you know what? Sometimes you just walk away. Because it's not worth it. Sometimes people will say stupid things to you and curse at you. Just keep walking. It's not that you're a coward. You know what? You're about to make this thing worse. Because you know what's going to kick in? Your self-righteousness is going to get kicked in. Now, you might be right in what you say. But that's not your motive. Right is not your motive. Self-righteousness becomes your motive. Let it go. That's right. Let it go. It's not worth it. Yeah, it's not worth it. It's just like my son and I, we stopped at the store, in the morning, and this guy went off about, sign this petition, blah, 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 blah. No thank you. Let's just keep going. Just keep going, because you're going to get into this big argument. It's just not worth it, okay? That's everyday life. And every day you have to examine yourself because every day somebody will provoke you. Okay? You gotta just let a lot of things go. It doesn't mean that you're weak. It doesn't mean that, you're just a garbage can people can dump on you. Look at the alternative. Hold that animal down. Down, boy. Down. Down. That's right. That's right. That's right. It's you said something important in the first one. Um, uh, when self-righteousness kicks in, that's when I become judgmental of you. That is true. That's true. I feel the right to judge you. And if I feel the right that I have the right to judge you, now I can condemn you and I can do whatever. I can justify my next actions, okay? And that takes you then that takes you to the second statement you made, okay, that we ought to have a forgiving spirit. I just think about everything that God has ever forgiven me of. That's pretty scary. That's pretty scary. Okay? I trust God has spoken to us tonight in our Bible study. Amen? Our Father, tonight as you have spoken to